everyone, and welcome back to That Adventure Life. In the last couple of videos, we featured some shorter Washington hikes, and today we're going the other way. The Badger Valley to Grand Lake Loop Trail comes in with a distance of 8.6 miles and an elevation gain of 2,657 feet. This hike is located at the end of Obstruction Point Road on Hurricane Ridge inside Olympic National Park. The drive to get here is a little bit of an adventure in itself. The road's about 7.6 miles long and it's very narrow in certain spots with steep drop-offs. But as you'll see over the course of the video, the views that you will get from this trail are well worth it. Almost as soon as you set foot on the trail, you're going to start climbing. And you can expect to gain right around 300 feet in the first half mile of the hike. This video was shot in August, and we were surprised to see that there was still some snow on the higher peaks of the trail. There wasn't much up there, but just enough to be a little bit slippery at times. The views off to the right are absolutely stunning as you look off towards Windfall Peak and McCartney Peak. Since we almost slid all the way down that first patch of snow, we decided that we would go around the second patch. As soon as we got around that second patch, we found ourselves at the top of the first climb, and the views were absolutely amazing. The other good thing about this part of the trail is that you're going to get a small break from climbing. Please note that the ascent that we just finished was one of the smallest climbs on this trail. If you decide to do this and that last climb seemed like a lot for you, you're probably not going to want to drop all the way down into the valley because the climb out is rough. This entire hike takes place at right around 6,000 feet above sea level, so these aren't extreme elevations, but the air is just a little bit thin up here. After a nice little downhill and a flat section to help you catch your breath, you are going to be on to the second climb of the hike. You're going to be gaining just about the same amount of altitude on this one, but it's stretched out over a slightly longer distance. The nice thing is that you're going to be making your way up onto a ridge, so you're going to have beautiful views on both sides of the trail now. Way off in the distance now, you should be able to spot the snowy peaks of Mount Olympus. Coming in at an elevation of 7,980 feet, Mount Olympus is the tallest and most prominent mountain in the Olympic Mountains of Western Washington State. If you're not a fan of heights, this next part of the trail and a couple parts that are still coming up might be a little bit tough for you. The trail gets pretty narrow with steep drop-offs on either one or both sides. It's not completely vertical, but there is a good chance that you would go sliding down if you went over the side, so please watch your step. Once you reach the top of that second climb, you are going to come to a fork. If you want to do the hike we're doing in this video, you're going to make a left. Going right here will take you on the Lillian Ridgeway Trail. That one is supposed to be really difficult and hard to follow, so I think we made the right decision. This is where you will begin your steep descent into the valley. Once you reach the bottom, you will have no choice but to take a long and steep climb out. You can either do this as an out and back trail or a loop as we are in this video, but both ways out are pretty brutal. As you make your way down into the valley, if you look off towards the right, you should see one of the destinations of the trail, which is Grand Lake. But you're going to have to put in some work before you get to the lake, and things can get a little bit slippery. As I mentioned in most videos, shoes with a ton of traction will make your life easy here. Another thing you may want to consider bringing are some hiking poles. Unfortunately, we didn't, but you're going to be dropping down around 2,000 feet into the valley, and those poles can definitely take some of the shock off of your legs. You are going to be encountering 16 switchbacks on your way towards the valley floor. Unfortunately, your four-legged friends are not allowed on this trail, but that doesn't mean that you won't find any four-legged critters out here. There have been reports of bear and cougar sightings here, so it might not be a bad idea to bring some bear spray with you. On the slightly less terrifying side, you might also see deer, elk, and marmots here. In fact, you might just spot a deer in this video in just a little bit. As you get towards the bottom of the switchbacks, the forest will start to get more and more dense. This was definitely appreciated because it was giving us some shade on a pretty warm day. Once we reached the bottom of the switchbacks, we were still about 1.25 miles away from the lake, but the trail definitely started to mellow out a little bit. Obviously, going downhill doesn't take anywhere near as much energy as going up, but it was nice being on slightly flatter trails so we could spend a little bit less time worrying about the terrain and a little bit more time enjoying the scenery. Eventually, we came to the first water crossing of the trail. Obviously, this one is very simple, but there are a couple further down the trail where you have to balance on logs or hop across rocks. This one had a cute little trickling waterfall and even a little trough that made jumping over it super easy. I'd like to say that we planned it this way, but in all actuality, we just ended up getting lucky because the wildflowers were in full bloom while we were visiting. This took an already picturesque hike and boosted it to a whole new level. One thing is for sure on this trail, you need to bring way more water than you think you need. Unless you're bringing a filter to refill at Grand Lake, you're going to need a lot of water to do this trail. Even the trailhead is about 30 minutes from civilization, so you really need to be careful and take care of yourself out here. We have now reached the second water crossing, and as you can see, it's a little bit more difficult than the first one. Even though neither of us did, I might recommend wearing shoes that you don't mind getting wet. There aren't a ton of opportunities for your shoes to get wet, but it's something to be prepared for. After the second water crossing, things will once again be mellowing out and you'll be going for a nice little stroll through the woods. We were pretty surprised that with all of the cars that we saw at the trailhead, we had maybe seen 3 people on this hike so far. It was so incredibly peaceful out here. One thing to keep in mind, if you like to listen to music on the trail, be sure to wear headphones. I'm sure your music taste is great, but some people just want to soak up that nature. At this point, we had come to another fork. Going straight would take you to Moose Lake and then Gladys Lake, and turning left like we're doing in this video will take you around Grand Lake and to Badger Valley. We heard good things about the other 2 lakes and we would like to check them out at some point. But with this being such a long and tricky trail, we wanted to make sure that we still had plenty of daylight to get back to the car. It ended up being the right call because we made it back to the car right around sunset. There was just one last tiny water crossing standing between us and Grand Lake. If you're into backpacking, one cool thing to know is that you can actually camp at this lake. But one thing that you would absolutely have to pack if you decide to camp here is bug spray. In all of our years of hiking and adventuring, I don't think that either of us have encountered bugs like we did around Grand Lake. This is where you can choose to either do this trail as an out and back, or you can cross this small bridge and continue on to make this a loop. It really is too bad because this is a gorgeous spot, but the whole time V and I looked like we were trying to invent new dance moves while we swatted away at the bugs. If you enjoy taking landscape photos like we do, there are a couple of small side trails that take you down to unique views of the lake. The water here is really clear, and besides a couple of campers on a distant shore, we had this entire place to ourselves. We did our best to ignore the biting bugs and take in just a couple more minutes of peace before continuing on. We definitely think that doing this trail as a loop rather than an out and back is worth it. This portion of the trail is really pretty, especially if you go when the wildflowers are blooming. And as an added bonus, doing the loop gives you a couple more fun stream crossings. If you're following along with the map on all trails, when we made the left at the lake, we switched from the Grand Valley Trail to the Badger Valley Trail. And we're going to be staying on the Badger Valley Trail all the way up a very steep climb until we get to the Obstruction Point Deer Park Trail. I think at this point in the hike, we were really enjoying the surroundings. But in the back of our minds, we knew that what goes down must come up. And every time the trail dropped down a little more, we knew that that was that much more that we would have to climb back up to get to the car. As we wound our way through the forest, we heard the sound of rushing water. Unfortunately, we couldn't get too close to this waterfall, but we were able to get a pretty nice view of it through the trees. Don't feel too bad though, because there is a much better waterfall a little ways down the trail. With all the streams and water crossings that we encountered, it was no real wonder why everything was so lush and green here. One of our favorite plants that we kept spotting along the trail is this one right here, and it's called Queen Anne's lace. Not only is it a really beautiful flower, but it's huge, and I was afraid I was going to lose V in it a couple of times. I would definitely recommend trying to do this hike when the flowers are blooming. There were several times where we came to wide open meadows that were absolutely packed full of flowers, and it was really cool. A lot of people tend to do this trail in the clockwise direction, unlike what we're doing in this video. Obviously, you're going to be enjoying the same views, but I think the climb out is a little bit harder in the direction that we're going. We were just playing it by ear this day, and we were almost thinking about just going to Grand Lake as an out and back trail. But we were enjoying it so much that we opted for some extra punishment and completed the loop. Here we are arriving at my second favorite bridge of the entire hike. Be sure to watch your step on this one, because as you can see, it's basically just a fallen log with a rope on one side. We are now approaching the 5-mile mark of this hike, and you may be thinking, this trail is just too dang long. And if that's how you're feeling, worry not, because Washington has a ton of gorgeous hikes, and some of them take you to amazing places, and they're not all that long. For example, click in the upper corner right now if you want to see our hike to 𝐿𝐿𝐷𝐴 Falls. That trail is quite short and takes you to one of the most beautiful waterfalls I've seen in quite a long time. Even though this part of the forest looks nice and bright, the camera was struggling and compensating for how dark it really was. All of the trees here gave this part of the trail a ton of shade, but that means that it will get dark here way sooner. So be sure to leave some time and bring a headlight. And here we are at my favorite bridge of the trail. It's really photogenic, and the waterfall under it just takes it up yet another notch. After crossing the Cool Bridge, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but this is where the climb starts, and you're going to be climbing almost all the way back to the car. Over the course of the next 3 miles, you'll be climbing right around 2,000 feet. And it will definitely be making sense why most people do this in the opposite direction. Not only is this climb steep, but it's relentless and slippery in certain places. This climb will definitely put your fitness level to the test, and I'm not even going to try to pretend that we didn't take a ton of breaks on it. One of the hardest parts about the initial climbs is that they don't use switchbacks, so you're just shooting straight up the hill. But luckily, the climb eventually gets just a tiny bit less steep when it comes to more beautiful open meadows. At this point, we were still wheezing, but at least we had something pretty to look at while we did it. The trail at this point will spend some time switching back and forth between beautiful wide open meadows and deep wooded areas. Here you can see the ridgeline that was the second climb of the trail. That should give you some idea of the massive elevation changes that you'll come across on this hike. You may remember earlier when I said that we had a deer encounter. This was definitely one of the ultimate highlights of this trail. B and I were both trudging along this trail with our heads down when suddenly we looked up and this deer was coming in the opposite direction. She didn't end up coming all the way up to us, but she definitely got close enough for some really cute pictures and video. Even though this path was fairly easy to follow and straightforward, there were a couple of parts that were super overgrown. If you have any questions at all, I would highly recommend using something like AllTrails or the Garmin InReach to make sure that you're going the right direction. This trail is way out in the middle of the wilderness, so it is a good idea to have a tracker like the Garmin InReach on you anyways. That way, if you get in trouble, you can radio for help. Unfortunately, things happen out here, and it's always good to be prepared. There were quite a few fallen trees out here, and I thought that V was going to demonstrate some of her limbo skills, but I think we were way too tired at this point for all of that. Aside from logs that you need to duck under on this trail, there are also a bunch that you need to hop over. This hike definitely has no shortage of tripping hazards. The trail almost seemed to get a little bit faint at this point. Not only did we have to hop over the creek, but then we had to climb over some logs and continue on the other side. This section of the trail can get pretty rocky, but much like the rest of the trail, it soon opens up to yet another gorgeous meadow. If you thought you saw flowers before, just wait till you get to this part of the trail because it seems like the wildflowers were everywhere. Here you will find yourself at yet another water crossing, and this one might take some parkour skills. You always have to be careful if you're going to be hopping rock to rock because you can never tell when one is going to roll out from under you. You still have quite a bit of climbing left to do, and this would not be a good place to roll your ankle. The finish line is clearly in sight at this point, and even though it's still pretty far away, hopefully it can give you some inspiration to keep pushing on. After spotting this adorable little marmot off in the distance, we came to another trail junction. As you can see by the sign, making a right here will take you up to the Deer Park Trail, but we're going to keep going straight. We have now come to the last water crossing of the trail, and at the time of the recording of this, it was small and gave us no problems. The path does get a little bit narrow here, so watch your step. You don't want to slide down this hill and have to climb even more. Hopefully you have saved just a little bit of your energy because it is now time for that final climb. And I'm not gonna lie, this last climb is a doozy. Over the course of 15 switchbacks, you'll be gaining right around 314 feet. We would have taken our time and had a nice leisurely climb out if it wasn't for the fact that the sun had now dropped behind the mountains. We not only wanted to get back to the car before dark, but we were also hoping to be all the way through that Obstruction Point drive before the sunset as well. I can't begin to tell you how happy we were when we heard voices and saw people up on the Obstruction Point trail. That meant that we were almost done with this monstrous climb. Finally, after what felt like a small eternity, we had reached the junction and the end of the steepest part of the climb. The trail still would be climbing the rest of the way up to the parking lot, but this was a much more manageable angle. V and I couldn't help but take one last walk towards the edge to look at the hill that we had just climbed. Even though our legs officially hated us at this point, there was definitely a large sense of accomplishment. Finally, we started to see the roof of the outhouse that is at the trailhead, and we knew that we were almost home. This trail is a monster, but the scenery and the views that you get from it make this 100% worth it in our opinion. And that is going to do it for this video. What do you think? Would you take on the hills at Badger Valley? Also, we're definitely looking forward to getting back to Washington, so if you have any trail recommendations for us, please let us know in the comments and we will get out there and check them out. If you enjoyed this video, do us a huge favor and like, comment, and subscribe because those really help us out. And for all the information about this hike as well as other awesome Washington adventures, head on over to thatadventurelife.com.